So darling, darling, stand by me. Oh, stand by me. Oh, stand by me.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, continuing with the theme I've been given for the month, which is reconnecting with our source. So we started off with exploring the unnaturalness of isolation and being alone, how it just runs so much counter to our nature. Before we started here, Doug was telling me he just heard something, I think on the radio or somewhere, about the threes. And the guy was saying that you can live for 3 minutes only without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks, was it? Huh? 3 weeks without food. I think you can go longer than that. And 3 months in isolation, then you just totally lose the plot. So that was kind of interesting to hear. So then the second week, though, we focused on the reality that we all have a soulmate. And what we mean by that is not the way people use it in this really flaky way. That all of us have an eternal companion. In the yoga texts, this was referred to as the Paramatma, the Supreme Soul, residing within the heart of all living beings. And so, having explored that, then tonight we're going to look at the nature of this connection with this Supreme Soul, which deals with the topic of a really deep and intimate and abiding friendship. So, I mean, everybody has this desire. I saw this thing on a news clip in America, 2 little kids. I mean, they're really tiny little kids in the street. One was a little black boy and the other one was a white boy. And they knew each other, and they were out with their parents in the street, and when they saw each other, there was just this elation. They just lit up and started running towards each other with their arms open like that. They ran up to each other and hugged, and they were just like bubbling over with happiness. And of course, that's a super feel-good viral video, that one. Everybody looks at it and enjoys it. And the reason that we find it so incredibly attractive is because it actually has something to do with our deeper and eternal spiritual nature. Something is striking a chord that is affecting us very, very deeply inside. So, people have this desire and a great appreciation for very deep friendships. The idea of having someone that will really stand by you, no matter what, through thick or thin, in spite of all your defects, warts and all. You've got somebody that actually cares about you and will stand by you. That has enormous appeal. And it has enormous appeal, again, as I said, because it is connected to our deeper and eternal spiritual nature. And so they come up with this term, the social media term BFF, best friend forever. And it's like, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that? Well, again, it's because it's actually connected. It appeals to us in our deeper inner self. The idea of having a best friend and forever. It's not just like best friend for now, it's best friend forever. And we say this, and we say it because it's actually a desire that we have. It's a desire that all living beings have. And of course, the failings that come from material relationships often make it so that people now turn their attention to another species. They get pets, and they build hugely deep and what they think is meaningful relationships with somebody that's got a body from another species. I mean, that's really far out. That's actually really amazing. But once again, it just points to two things. One is this great desire to have such a connection, and the failing of material relationships. Relationships with other limited material personalities means that we're going to look elsewhere. We're going to go into species to try and fulfill that craving, that desire, that great need that we have. So, what is, having spoken last week about the fact that we all have a soulmate, and quite unbeknown to most of us, what is the nature of that relationship? Well, firstly, the nature of that relationship is that it is deeply joyful and even ecstatic. Now, all, with very few exceptions, all yogis from ancient times, the focus of their meditation was to reconnect with this transcendental personality who is residing along with me within the core of my heart. And the focus of all their endeavors was to reconnect with that transcendental personality. I don't know how many people here are connected with the modern yoga scene, but yoga, as it is now become so popular, particularly in the Western world, but all over, was largely due to a really amazing personality. His name was Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya was probably one of the last great Ashtanga yogis. And his disciples have been responsible for leaving a really deep imprint on the world in terms of spreading at least the most fundamental part of yoga, which is asana, which is actually only a tiny little part of what yoga really is. Not long before he left this world, he wrote a poem in he was from the state of Tamil Nadu, So it was written in Tamil. Although he was a great Sanskrit scholar, I mean, like really great Sanskrit scholar. And this poem, the Yog Anjalishram, is the great offering of yoga. And in the 8th verse, he writes, seeing the beauty of the Lord in his heart, whose consort is Goddess Lakshmi, the Lord who supports the universe, the yogi, dancing with joy, is lost in this vision. And most people can't sort of relate to that, and they can start reading some of the other verses about yoga practices, and suddenly you've got this there. There's not just this, he's got about 5 verses in this long poem that deals with the topic of this Lord Paramatma, the Supreme Soul. And he speaks here about the mature fruit of yoga practice. To be able to, it's not a question of visualizing, it's not something that's created in your mind, but through transcendental vision, one is able to see this divine personality standing within the region of the heart, who is so absolutely beautiful and gorgeous, so completely enchanting, that the response of the yogis were these manifestation of these ecstatic symptoms, like profuse shedding of tears, their hair standing on end, the trembling of the skin. They're just lost in this ecstatic joy, this profound spiritual experience. And it says, the yogi dancing with joy is lost in this vision. And of course, for most people in the Western world, even in India, hearing that, it just doesn't seem to fit with people's sort of limited understanding of what a yogi is. But this was actually the aspiration, the desire, the focus, and the goal of practice of the yogis. This very deep and transcendental friendship, this bond of deep and transcendental friendship, is spoken about throughout all of the Vedas. And last week I read a couple of verses from the Mundaka Upanishad, where it likens the tree, a body, to be like a tree, and sitting within this tree are 2 birds. One is the individual living being who is busy hopping from branch to branch, busily trying to enjoy the fruits in that tree, but all the while suffering moroseness and emptiness. But there is another bird standing within that tree, the eternal friend. So it states, the Lord and the living entity are compared to 2 birds sitting in a tree. And while the illusioned living entity eats the fruits of the material world, the Lord is supreme soul and best friend, witnesses these activities. So what the truth that we hope to establish here, and what we mentioned also last week, that this relationship that I'm speaking of is an existing relationship. It's not with somebody foreign. It's somebody, not with someone that's not connected. There is no one that is more intimately connected with you than this particular transcendental feature known as the Lord of the heart, or the Lord within the heart. And the process of yoga is really about revitalizing. This relationship is there, it is existing. After so many lifetimes of wandering through the material world in search of the friend, in search of the perfect love, we have failed to recognize that it is so close to us. And rather than looking outside, this should become a journey within. So this is spoken about also in another famous text called the Brahma Samhita. The Brahma Samhita in the 5th chapter, in the 21st shloka, it states that the Atma it literally means the self, the living being. The Atma is eternal and is forever joined to that Supreme Person by a tie of an eternal kinship. And this is just like, wow. And if we actually think about it and consider it, it's like, okay, this is why. This is why those two kids running towards each other, embracing, why we're attracted to friendship, why we're attracted to the idea of having a support. I mean, people, when someone declares that this person may be a partner in life, a friend, that person's my rock. Everybody goes like, ah, that's so nice. And it is. It's really nice. But it's really nice because there is a deeper truth to it. It's pointing to something of more significance. We do have a shelter. We desire shelter. This word, ashraya, means the transcendental shelter. In our emptiness, in our loneliness, in our purposelessness, we're always taking shelter. We take shelter in these dumb devices. We take shelter in a TV. We take shelter in a limited and temporary relationship. We take shelter in food. We take shelter in pornography. All kinds of stuff. We have these go-tos to try and escape the loneliness that we experience within. But we're looking outside and we're looking at things that cannot fill that gap for us. So what does it really take? I've made a few notes here just so I can get through things as quickly as possible. What is it that makes someone a real friend? If we had to define what is a true friend, what is a real friend? Of course, there's going to be a lot of things, but I think some of the most commonly accepted and desirable characteristics is that a friend is someone who is understanding. If you have a friend and you go to that friend to explain a problem, to open your heart to them, then you know that your friend will be understanding. They will not condemn you or misunderstand you. No matter what the problem you're having, your friend will still care about you and love you. At least that's the hope. The problem is it doesn't always work like that. You go and open your heart to some other material personality, and they happen to be your friend now. And then in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, maybe they're not your friend anymore. And now they're taking all the stuff you reveal to them and hurling it back at you. And then there's this huge betrayal. I'm so hurt. No, I'm so dumb. By placing your trust and faith in another limited and material personality, it's not always going to work out very well. So when we speak of this Lord within the heart, Lord Paramatma, the Parampurusha, the Supreme Person, as he is described by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutra, we are speaking of the perfect friend and the perfect shelter. So I'll just read a couple of verses, one from the Bhagavad-Gita. It says, "A person knowing me as the Supreme Lord of all, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material misery." This is something that the experience of the yogi in this mature realization is that this intimate friend of mine is actually the friend of all and the well-wisher of all, no matter what they say or do or think or how they act. This Paramatma remains the actual friend and well-wisher of all. So in another text in the Bhagavad Purana, it states that it's speaking about this Supreme Soul. "You are situated in everyone's heart as the Supreme Soul, just to show your causeless mercy, and you are the eternal well-wisher." Then another one, "To serve the Supreme Soul is most natural for the soul, the individual being, because the Supreme Soul is the most beloved, the Lord of the soul and the well-wisher of all other living entities." So this is something that we don't actually talk about very much, because you're never totally sure how people are going to react to things. Mostly, we're giving advice on how to discover your eternal spiritual identity, to reconnect with who you truly are, beyond the body, beyond these temporary identifications that go with the body. How to find and begin to taste and experience true transcendental happiness. How to awaken true spiritual love. And of course, we promote what is called the Yuga Dharma. For this particular time in which we live, it is considered the most efficient and effective means for self-realization and for God realization. And that is through the chanting of these transcendental sounds. This activity is also the principal means by which one can come to, as I mentioned, what's broadly described as God realization. This realization of my true and eternal friend, my true and eternal lover, this Lord within my heart. So next week we'll just talk a little bit more about how is this experienced? What is the experience of the yogi when they have this form of realization? What happens to a person? And that will pretty much round out the theme for the month, reconnecting with our source. Anybody have a question? Is this interesting? Yeah? We have to lighten up a little bit. We have to get back to, the simplicity. We've become very complicated, become overly emotional, overly involved with our minds. The world is literally falling apart. Consumer economics is largely responsible because they've developed all of these amazing tools to just manipulate the crap out of you. And most of what's in your mind is not even an original thought. It's all been put there. And we're encouraged to become envious and greedy. These were the two underlying principles which drove consumer economics and was heavily promoted beginning in the 1930s by, at that time, the person that was considered the greatest economist in the world. He said these two things are absolutely essential for the success of the consumer economic model: envy and greed. All advertising is based on envy, looking at what others have and desiring it. That used to be considered a really bad quality. And so we've shifted a long way from where people have been for hundreds and thousands of years. Just in the last few decades, there's been this monumental shift. And there is a need to get back to basics. And this is actually what it is that we're discussing here. Reconnecting with our source. This is about getting as far back to basics as possible. Okay?